Hello and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran who for some reason in the year 2018 is still pursuing what you call ringtone royalties, or else a scrappy upstart discovering that old Guild D25 that your dad stashed away in the attic, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of February 2017. Thanks for being here. Man, I had a great last month on the road. I got to tell you, I flew down to New Orleans where the Cayamo cruise was embarking from. Now, that is a cruise through the Caribbean that specializes in the type of music that I play. It's that type of music used to be called roots music. Now it's called Americana music, but it's basically just a bunch of singer-songwriters, in this case on a boat. And I got to catch up with a lot of friends and make some new ones, and I got to play a handful of sets of music, and then I taped a few podcasts with the other artists on board. It was great. I tell you this, though, being on a boat in general, especially a boat that big, I don't know if I'm cut out for it. Those boats are like 14 stories tall. And like every time that I'd walk around the top deck near the railing, I had this really intense, unpleasant feeling that's hard to describe. I described it to my wife and she thinks it's called vertigo, but I'm not sure that's quite it. It's a very specific feeling. It's basically the feeling of there being a very loud voice in the back of your head saying, what if you just jumped over the side of this boat into the open ocean in the middle of the night right now? Very bad thought to have over and over again. So anytime I had had a few too many pops, as is my wont, I made sure to stay away from the side of the boat, man, because it didn't sit right with me. But other than my completely unwarranted existential dread, the whole thing went off without a hitch. It was really great. I'd like to thank Sixth Man, the production company that puts the whole thing on, for hosting me and for plying me with more bullet bourbon than is even remotely healthy. Thank you, Sixth Man, and thank you to all the artists who sat down and subjected themselves to one of my prying interviews. I look forward to broadcasting those I taped, including today's, over the next couple months. Also, I'd like to thank everybody who came out to the show in Oklahoma City. I love playing the Blue Door there, and even on a Monday night, you guys showed up, and I most appreciate it. I really do. It was a great trip. I got to play on Monday night. I played at the Blue Door in Oklahoma City, and then the next night, I had tickets to see LeBron James play the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, the question remains whether I booked that show first or whether I booked my tickets to see LeBron James first and then retroactively booked the show. Maybe we'll never know the answer to the question, but I think we hashed it out with everybody in the merch line after the show, and I think the place that most people came down to was that it didn't matter to them. But thank you to Greg at the Blue Door, and thank you to everyone at Barrios Restaurant for hosting me and my friends on game day. Jenny and Amy, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a great trip. Now, if you'd like to come see one of those shows in the coming months, here's where I'll be. March 6th at the Beachland Tavern in Cleveland, Ohio. March 7th at Club Cafe in Pittsburgh. March 8th at the Rumba Cafe in Columbus, March 9th at the Arc in Ann Arbor, the 10th at the Drake Hotel in Toronto, and finally the 11th at the 9th Ward at Babeville in Buffalo, New York, and then I'm working on a bunch of dates in April, in May, across the East Coast and the Southeast. So keep an eye open for those. Also, I'd like to mention, if you're a listener to this show, but you've never heard any of my songs, we should rectify that. And a good place to do that is over at Spotify. Just search the words Intro to Joe Pug, and a playlist will come up with about 10 of my songs over the course of different records that I put out that'll give you a pretty good idea of what I'm about musically. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here are 2 really quick, easy, and free things that you can do to help me out. First, you could rate the show from within your podcast app. Just open up the app, click the search button, type in the Working Songwriter, click on the Reviews for the Show button, and then write one of your own. The second thing that you could do, also from your phone, is just share the episode with a like-minded friend who you think might be predisposed to liking it. That's just as quick and easy as the rating process within your podcast app. You just click that little square with the arrow coming out of the top, and then it'll open up a menu for you to text or email a link of the episode to someone. Or, as always, you could just go old school. Tell someone about the show who you think might like it. The simple math on all of that is that it will help me much more than it will be a pain in the ass for you. So I thank you for doing that. That's pretty much all the harassment I have. I want to warn you right now that this month we actually have an additional segment in the show, and here's why. I've always intended this show for 2 distinct audiences, and the first is sort of a general music listener that wants some context about their favorite songwriters and their process. And the second is actually the community of songwriters themselves. I've always wanted this show to serve as something of like a water cooler for us to sit around and discuss big ideas with one another. So it's in that vein that coming up here, we're going to have a brief discussion on the Music Modernization Act that has been introduced to Congress, and a few other legal issues that are headed down the pike for songwriters and their intellectual property. I got a message last month from Brendan Anthony, who's a friend of mine and who also heads up the Texas Music Office, and he asked if I was going to address this bill on the show. And I told him I have no idea what this bill is because I'm horrible at business, and that we should just have Brendan on the show to walk us through it. And he agreed. So I gave him a buzz down at his office in the State House in Austin, Texas, and he detailed for us the finer points of the Music Modernization Act. So this is just a heads up to our portion of the audience that is strictly music listeners, that this is about to get pretty inside baseball here and maybe a little boring for you. So if you'd like to scrub ahead for the John Paul White interview, that begins around the 25-minute mark here in the podcast. So just scrub ahead to 25 minutes. You'll hear the Wurlitzer music and you'll know that it's time to go. Okay, here's Brendan. I'm here on the line with Brendan Anthony, the head of the Texas Music Office. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Can you start by giving our audience a little bit of your background and then a little bit about the job that you're doing right now for musicians across the state of Texas?
Sure. For a long time, I was a touring musician. I played with Texas acts like Pat Green and several others. Toured the country and Western Europe, as so many of us do. I did that for about 15 years, retired from that life in 2010, and got busy working in e-commerce in the music industry here in Austin. And we ran e-commerce and digital storefronts for some of music's biggest brands, and was really excited to do that. I did that for about 4 or 5 years until I got a call from the governor of Texas, who appointed me to run the Texas Music Office. And it's been my honor to do that for about 3 years. The Texas Music Office is an economic development company that oversees the growth and the development of the Texas music industry, which is a far-flung and diverse industry. And we're doing that by building an interconnected series of music-friendly communities statewide, working in the trenches with community leaders to make communication easier for the creative community so that they can translate needs to elected leadership, city government, to have their needs addressed in a more meaningful way. We also operate a state-of-the-art and unparalleled database for music industry professionals statewide, nearly 20,000 listings that folks from here in the state who want to connect with one another can use, and those from outside the state can utilize to connect here in the state. We also run a grant program that puts instruments in the hands of kids who need them and create music programming opportunities for underserved communities. And then we sit on the economic development team, which means that we spend a lot of time working to encourage businesses that are vital to creating a music industry infrastructure in Texas to expand into the state and do more business here.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique office. I don't know that another one exists across the country. We're here today to discuss the Music Modernization Act that's making its way through the U.S. Senate, because a couple weeks ago you texted me and asked if I was going to discuss it on the show, and I said I had no damn idea what it was about, so I made you come on the show here. Can you start just from a very rudimentary place by describing our royalty system as it exists now and why publishers and songwriters are finding it inadequate for the age of digital music and streaming?
Sure, and I'll try to keep this as high level as possible because I understand that it's kind of a ponderous topic, but it's incredibly important, as we know. And let me preface this by saying I'm not a legislative scholar and I'm not an attorney, but I do think it's incredibly important, like I say, to understand the broad strokes of this. So let me start by answering that question as directly as I can. So this Music Modernization Act has mostly to do with addressing how mechanical royalties, mechanical licenses are paid out and dealt with by streaming services, right? So as it exists today and has existed for many years, a mechanical license is set to license individual sales from CDs, singles, tangible products. The record labels would report to these different services, radio, etc., the information, the songwriter, the performer on these individual songs, and then they'd be played, and mechanical royalties would be, or they'd be, that product would be sold, and mechanical royalties would be paid back. That system worked fine for a while, and it sort of carried through to the download era, if you will, when Apple came online and that got legal and people started downloading records. That system sort of carried through, but as we started to see the advent of interactive streaming services like Spotify in particular come online and get immensely popular, people at a high level started to react to that, and this is sort of a culmination of about 10 years of work to fix that issue and how we rethink the current state of mechanical licenses and streaming services.
It's my understanding that they're going to change the standards and rate setting. Those would kind of be erased, and there would be a marketplace used to replace them. Do you know anything about that?
Well, essentially what's going to happen is this Music Modernization Act will create a new quasi-governmental agency called the Mechanical Licensing Collective, right? That will have a board that oversees it, that will have responsibility to match these rights holders to the music that gets played on streaming services. So that's the really big change that's happening. That's the big creation that's happening on this in this bill.
Gotcha. So, and that's something is basically ASCAP and BMI who look out for songwriters who are signed up with them now. Are they basically filling the breach on that right now until an agency like this is created?
Yeah, sort of. So when a user plays a track on Spotify, let's just use Spotify, for example, because we'll come back to that. Spotify is the entity right now that has gotten hit with these massive class action lawsuits, okay, for infringement. And that's what we're trying to fix. That's what this Music Modernization Act is sort of trying to fix. So when a user plays a track on Spotify, Spotify has to determine what composition underlies the master recording, and they've got to pay these mechanical royalties to the original songwriter and publisher, right? So record labels don't, generally speaking, supply info about the underlying composition. And the digital services will usually work through a third-party vendor, say Harry Fox or Music Reports, Inc., to match those recordings to the original compositions and manage the royalty payouts to you or your publisher. Now, the responsibility to match that composition to the recording falls on the streaming service today, to achieve that, and quite often there are errors that they make. That's where a lot of these infringement lawsuits come from. And to my understanding today, there's not a blanket mechanical license that exists, right? There are compulsory licenses that exist that allow streaming services to pay these royalty rates set by government-run process. And each service has to today gain a compulsory license for each of the millions and millions of songs in its catalog. Say 40 or 50 million in the case of Spotify. And then it's got to send that right holder a notice of intent to use their stuff on their streaming service. And if they can't track it down, then they send that NOI, the notice of intent, to the U.S. Copyright Office. And then the streaming services have to account for mechanicals from billions of annual streams to pay the rights holders back, the ones that they were able to track down anyway. And they've got to pay them what they're owed by law. That's this huge responsibility that we're trying to find a more fair and equitable way to walk through. So that's a huge responsibility for the digital services and Spotify in particular, and one that results in a lot of lawsuits and ill feeling towards them. And so that problem, as you say, is dealt with more easily on the performance royalty side. We're talking about mechanical royalties. They're more dealt with more easily on the performance royalty side because you can today get a blanket license from BMI and ASCAP to play those artist catalogs on streaming services and non-interactive services like satellite radio, terrestrial radio, and services like Pandora, right?
So the cure-all
PROs have their rates set by the rate courts.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
And the cure-all here would be basically a blanket license for the mechanical end, is what you're saying.
You got it. Essentially, that is exactly what they're trying to create. I say I apologize. I'm neither an advocate for or against the bill. I'm simply trying to give information here, but that's the problem that is attempting to be solved.
Now, what's interesting to me is it seems like both sides, songwriters seem to be for this, and I also noticed that the Digital Media Association, which represents the streaming services, they support this as well. Is that correct? Yeah, they do. That's what's so interesting about what's happening right now. I've heard it said that, Jupiter and Saturn are lining up. I heard that on an interview about this morning. And maybe that's right, because you've got this confluence of willing sponsors for bills like this, and then you've got seeming coherence and unity from the vast majority of the music business at large. So that really never happens, right? So you've got DEMA, and you've got, and that's the folks that represent streaming services and digital services. You've got the National Association of Broadcasters who are essentially saying that, get this term, they're positively neutral about this in Congress. That's a big thing, right? Yeah.
That means that they're neutral on the bill, but they're positive about its passage, right? So figure that. But yes, you're right. They are essentially saying that they're not going to stand in the way of passage of this bill, which is a big thing because they have all the lobbying power in the world to shut it down.
So if songwriters are listening now and they are either for this and they like the idea and they want to advocate for it, or they don't like it and they want to advocate against it, who can they register that approval or disapproval with? What kind of action can they take?
Great question. So let me run through a couple of key members who are on board right now as advocates for this bill. So on the House side, this bill 4706 was introduced by Representative Doug Collins from Georgia. And it's been co-sponsored by over 50 House representatives at this point. And this is very bipartisan, mind you. So that's interesting as well. On the Senate side, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah, a Republican, and Lamar Alexander from Tennessee, a Republican, and Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island are the key sponsors on the Senate side. Bipartisan and very big advocates for this bill. So if you're a member or you're a constituent of one of those representatives or senators, please feel free to call into their office and register your feeling either way about this. And you can also check out online on, you can search either of these bills online. And Joe, I'll send you some of these links to make it easier for the listeners.
Sure.
They can go online and see all the additional sponsors. And quite likely, a lot of these folks will be represented by one of those co-sponsors, and they can reach out to them and register their feelings as well. On board, on the advocacy side, are ASCAP, BMI, RIAA, that's the recording industry, A2IM, that's the American Association of Independent Music, the Recording Academy, the Grammy chapter in NARAS, NSAI, National Songwriters Association, Songwriters of North America, PMA, the Production Music Association, CMPA, Church Music Publishers Association, on and on. So if you go to, say, the Music First Coalition, or you contact one of those trade organizations directly, you can get a lot more information. You can contact Sound Exchange. They're working very hard on this too. NMPA is working very hard on this. There are a wide range of folks from whom you can get much more detailed information, and you can register your feelings about the process. And now is the time, because they will begin markup of this bill probably, and that means that they'll try to establish a full consensus to move it, vote on it from the House, and move it to the Senate in March. So that's really imminent. And then the feeling is, from what I'm hearing, is that the Senate will receive the House's vote, and then the Senate will vote on their bills, hopefully by the end of the session. A couple other very interesting things, Joe, and this is stuff I did not know until I really started paying attention to this, is that Chairman Goodlatte of the Senate Judiciary Committee is retiring at the end of the session. And he has been working on this for years and years, copyright reform. He's retiring. So what that tells me is he's going to make a concerted effort to try to get this passed. And if you're a fan of this bill as it stands, after you do some more research, and please do more research, or you aren't a fan for some reason and think it could use some help, and many people do, mind you, independent songwriters have some issues with this. While they
what
think
are those
there are
issues?
some very, very good parts of this bill, well, there's not an opt-out, right? Once this system's built, you're going to be a part of it. And why that's important is because record labels can directly create direct licenses for these streaming services, which give them and their artists better rates. But you as an independent songwriter are not going to have that opportunity. And, you know, I don't know where that is going to end up falling for everybody. You know, I don't know how that's going to affect your bottom line in particular, right, Joe? I'm not 100% sure. That's right. Something to pay attention to. Some folks have an issue with a clause in the bill that essentially indemnifies Spotify from class action infringement lawsuits as of, it's a retroactive date, it's set for January 1st, 2018. So this bill, look, in fact, protects Spotify from some of those big lawsuits that have brought it to the table. Right? And that's very important. So possible that some of those things get fixed in this markup period? Perhaps not, but now is the time for songwriters anywhere and everywhere that and independent publishers who have a strong feeling either way about this to make their voices heard. This is it. This is the time to do that. This represents likely the largest change, if this passes, that we'll have seen in years and years and years, probably since the middle or late 90s, and could be for quite some time.
I don't know what I think about this yet. I got to look more into it, but you were so helpful today, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, what a privilege. I absolutely love the podcast. I listen to it all the time, and I think it's a real help to folks who are trying to pick up the pen. I think it's a great resource, so keep it up, man. We wish we still had you back in Austin for sure, but
Thank
you're
you,
doing
brother.
great work, man.
I'll be there. I'll be back in May for a wedding and to play some shows, so let's grab a Pearl Snap then.
Let's do it. I look forward to it.
Okay. Thanks, Brendan. Peace. My guest today has seen about as many sides of the music business as there are to see. From the inside of a staff writer's room to a star turn at the Grammys to the role of executive at his own label. John Paul White was born in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and grew up in Loretto, Tennessee. He spent a decade plus in Nashville writing songs for EMI and was even slated to release a solo album of his own for Capitol Records before his debut, The Long Goodbye, fell victim to turmoil at the label. That impediment only set the stage, though, for his fortuitous meeting with Joy Williams at a songwriter's workshop. The two formed the folk duo, The Civil Wars. Their second show was recorded and released as Live from Eddie's Attic, and it attracted an immediate cult following that sent them on a trajectory that would include late-night TV appearances, celebrity endorsements, and perhaps most unlikely of all, a folk album that went to number 10 on the Billboard 200. When their first album, Barton Hollow, was released, they toured supporting Adele. The group would go on to win 4 Grammy Awards and a Golden Globe nomination. The Civil Wars abruptly called it quits in 2014. Since then, John Paul has found time to found Single Lock Records, which has an impressive roster of talent that includes St. Paul and the Broken Bones and Nicole Atkins. And he's also released an album of his own entitled Beulah, which NPR has praised as a wise, entrancing, and meticulous bit of Southern folk. He was on the cruise that we did in the Caribbean last week, and he was kind enough to stop by in front of an audience, no less, to talk about his journey and how he got where he is now. Well, man, I want you to take me back before the Civil Wars are formed, and you are in Nashville working as a staff writer for EMI. What was your title?
The way that happened is growing up in the Shoals. You realize all the soul and R&B stuff that happened in the Shoals, and we could definitely go into that. But there was also a lot of great songwriters in town, and so I beat my head against the wall playing in bars up and down the state line, where it was dry on one side and wet on the other. Mm-hmm. And so it was a pretty rough situation to live in. But I thought some record company man was going to walk in and, slap the contract on the back of the car, and I was going to make millions of dollars. That did not happen. So I went back to college and met a guy, his name's Walt Aldridge, who just recently was inducted into the Songwriter Hall of Fame and the Alabama Music Hall of Fame as well. He wrote a bunch of songs of the year throughout the 80s and the 90s, and so he was my mentor. Mm-hmm. And I interned with him and wrote songs for him, and he got me signed to a contract at EMI. But I'd only written about 3 songs before I met him, because I never wanted to be a songwriter.
You just wanted to be a performer?
I just wanted to sing. I just wanted to get the girl. I didn't care. It was all superficial. It was all surface driven until I started writing songs, and I had to figure out what made me click, because I spent most of my time as a staff writer trying to write what I thought other people wanted to cut, because that was the job. You wanted other artists to want to live inside your song and sing it and get it on the radio. Yeah. And so I was just a mercenary going for it and failing miserably.
Why do you think you were failing?
because it was inauthentic, and they could see through it. And I didn't know that at the time, but I listen back to it now, and I don't even know who that guy is. Those songs are. It's kind of hard to believe they came from me, but they were just me reflecting and just pulling from other people's discography and listening to the radio and like, oh, they want that? Well, then I'll give them that.
Right.
They want positive up-tempo? Then by God, I'll give them positive up-tempo.
Yeah.
And I suck at positive up-tempo.
I feel you on that, brother.
Yeah.
I feel you on that.
To my publisher and all labels and managers' chagrin, I suck at positive up-tempo. So I decided I'm miserable. And I don't even remember why I got into this business now, because I'm not happy. I'd just soon mount tires than do this. And so I decided, I have budget here with EMI. I'm just going to spend their money while I'm still in contract and just write some songs for myself and go into the studio and do them up. And then I'll have this cassette, this CD that I can walk away with and show my kids and say, I went for it, and and I'm proud of this. But I just wasn't meant for this gig. And immediately people started cutting those songs.
Really?
And I just kept going farther and farther away from them, so I thought, and more toward me. And there's something clicked, because a lot of artists in Nashville, and this is no secret, they're not really country music fans.
Right.
And you all guessed it, but it's definitely true. They all wish they were rock and rollers. They all wish that they were, they were playing lead guitar for Boston or something like that.
So they're listening to Mastodon in their house.
Yes. Yeah, or hip hop. They listen. And at the time, it wasn't so much that, but they were all Southern rock guys, but I was their outlet. What I wrote was left of center. It wasn't the mainstream sort of thing, but it was close enough, because lyrically I still had those chops that I had honed writing with those master craftsmen in town.
So what would some of those chops be that you learned on the technical end?
Well, most of them I learned from Walt, and a lot of it was what not to do. It was really more that. He never really micromanaged what I did, but he would definitely point out, I see what you did here, and I see the worth of it. Maybe try this angle, and you'll include more listeners. And as an example, he used to say, never put a ring in a song. And a ring? A ring, okay. A rang. Yeah. And what he would mean by that is, as soon as you put a wedding ring on somebody's finger in a song, you've just alienated everyone that's not in a relationship. And that really hit home. Okay, he said the second you just take that one little item out of the song, you've included everyone, and they can step inside the song and be that person, be the narrator, be the actor. And that's so much more of a personal connection, instead of them standing on the outside of it and you writing something so personal that people just have to revel in the artist's depiction of their own life. I learned really quickly to blur the edges just enough to make things just non-specific enough that anyone that listens, it can be their story. And things really started working for me at that point, that I didn't have to feel like I had to be Bob Dylan.
Yeah. So basically, when you started going your own route, more authentic route, you were still able to keep some of that, some of the trappings of that former style that are actually attractive, that maybe, the totally left of center folkies don't bring into their own writing.
And that frustrates me. I definitely, I am unique in that way. I would definitely not toot my own horn in any way, but I do. That is one thing that I think makes me a little unique to others, is that, I grew up with Chris Christopherson and Townes Van Zandt and also Dylan, but Shel Silverstein and people like that. But I also grew up with 80s and 90s country, and Bob McDill and Paul Overstreet and Waylon Holyfield and Sonny Throckmorton, folks like that. And they were all trying to write a hit. And somewhere in between there is where I live. Mm-hmm. I grew up with pop music, That's all I heard in my house. Other than country records, I heard pop music. So that's in my bones. I want verse, chorus, bridge, chorus out.
Yeah.
My body just needs that. And I have to fight to get out of that place. But I also want A to lead to B to lead to C. I might make you dig a little, but I'm not looking to be abstract and boggle you with my lyrical prowess.
Yeah.
And that bores me. I mean,
Yes.
most people don't have time for it nowadays anyway. I want to lay my cards on the table
Yes.
and let you use it to your own end.
I like that. I've always thought of songs that way. It's like you have this metaphor for your own life, and you're trying to construct the bones of the song that people can hang the picture of their father inside that song, their lover that
100%.
left, and not mine.
Yes, 100%. And I get that so much after shows that people will tell me what a certain song means to them, and the whole time I'm thinking, that is totally not what that song's about.
Yeah.
But then I take credit for their brilliant idea. I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally where I was going. I'm glad you got that. Most people don't get that, including me.
I got these songs of mine. They're called hymns, and one of them is Hymn 101, Hymn 76. And one time a person came up to me at a show, and they go, I figured out what it is. And I said, what? They were like, those were the highways that you were traveling on when you wrote those songs. And I said, you got it.
Yeah. Sure.
You got it, man.
Yep, I agree.
So you meet Joy Williams at a songwriter's workshop, and before you know it, your second show has been recorded at Eddie's Attic. It goes, this probably wasn't even a word at the time, but it goes viral, basically, and sets you guys on just a blast-off course. Can you kind of speak to the earlier moments of that project taking off?
It was, I won't even pretend that it wasn't surreal. I'd spent my whole life trying to get people to pay attention to me. We both had. And then all of a sudden, we couldn't say yes to everything that was in front of us. But I will say, it was the same process that I took with songwriting of just complete selfishness. Like, I'm going to make the music that makes me happy. And because I can't guess what other people want. There's no way I can guess. It's all subjective. It's all relative. Everybody has their own tastes. I tried guessing what people wanted and failed. So I decided I have to believe that there's other people out there like me that like the same things that I do. And if they're not, then such as, that's my lot.
Yeah, and maybe we're not a good fit.
Maybe we're not a good fit. And a lot of my heroes were not good fits in their lifetime, like Elliott Smith and Jeff Buckley and people like that. People were fans after the fact, mostly.
I know.
Towns, Van Zandt as well. A lot of these guys that they did have some fame, but they weren't for their time. And so with any music I make and have ever since then, because of getting to that desperate place, I just decided what makes me happy, what makes me want to get up there and play every day. And that's definitely what we did.
I mean, if you think about it, if you think of the fact that Elliott Smith recorded Figure 8 for DreamWorks, it was supposed to be his big push album. I think they go to Abbey Road to do it or something like that. And he makes Figure 8, an amazing album, amazing songs. He plays everything on it. And then even that, at the time, landed with a relative thud.
Sure.
I mean, you just think to yourself like, all right, well, if Figure 8 at the time landed with a thud, then,
Amen.
I'll be okay following my own truth.
Amen.
So what was a high point for you in that blast-off rocket ship? Like, was there a specific moment where you realized, wow, my dreams in a certain sense are coming true?
There definitely was, and that was selling out the Ryman Auditorium. I'd spent my whole life dreaming of playing that place, much less having a packed crowd and it being my show. I mean, I just wanted to play guitar for somebody, whatever, but I wanted to play. And but and so did my dad, and so did his dad, and because down in Loretta, we were right on the state line, which so is the Shoals, so it's all one like about 20 miles apart. And WSM AM station would broadcast all the way down there, so everybody was obsessed with the Grand Ole Opry and with the Ryman Auditorium. So when it actually happened, after that, I went into this major depression because I was like, all right, what now?
Yeah.
Do it again? you know, because that was the pinnacle for me. I got to do Royal Albert Hall.
Did your dad come to the Ryman show?
Oh yeah.
What was that like with him?
It was surreal, but I couldn't look at him.
What do you mean?
I had to focus.
Oh, right.
I was going to blow it if I looked at my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. But, you know, I come from a really small town. And so I consistently feel their hopes and dreams on my back. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud to carry that because, you know, but for the grace of God, I'd be that guy with my hopes on some other local boy's back.
Yeah.
But it can be daunting. It can sometimes push you through and make you continue doing what we do for a living when you may not really want to.
Yeah.
And then you look somebody in the eye and you're just like, God, I've got the best job in the world. Why am I griping about this? But, you know how it is. There's times when you want to run screaming and you want a 9-to-5 job and you don't want to think about this. You don't want this stuff on loop all the time. But, you know, I should say, when we went on hiatus, I had about 2 years of no loop in my head, no musical,
no creative loop,
nothing. I didn't sing in the shower. There was nothing going on up there. Well, something, but my wife would agree. There was nothing going on up there. And it's like things just started growing back. And during that time, I thought, do I write songs because I'm driven to write songs? Or do I do it because I can? Because I'm above average at doing it? Because someone gave me a gig, and that was why I wrote them, is just so I could sing. Mm-hmm. Is it still that way, or am I really a songwriter? You know, I can do the craft. I learned it for 10 years in Nashville with the best of the best, and I learned, you know, the ways to put these things together. But so it took me about 1.5 to 2 years to sit completely quiet and do nothing but listen to my kids about their day and listen to my wife about their day and fix stuff around the house and not think about packing my suitcase or do I need strings on my guitar.
Yeah.
It took that for these things to start to grow back that were kind of cauterized in my head, and these songs to start coming on loop that I couldn't not write down. And that's where Beulah, that record, came from, was me. I shoved it down as long as I could because I knew as soon as I started writing songs, I'd be on some cruise ship.
With Joe fucking Pug.
With Joe fucking Pug. No offense, of course.
No, but do you think that fallow period there, do you think it could kind of be conceptualized as you had a narrative of your life in your mind from your 20s up until the Civil War's reached their apex? It reaches the apex, it's done, and it's almost like you've built a forest and then there's just a forest fire and everything's burned to the damn ground, and you just needed that 2 years to figure out what the new narrative is, because the old narrative is over now.
You know, it's funny, and I think a lot of people probably see it as that was probably the case. For me, I was really burned out, and I didn't want to walk across the street and play a song for somebody.
Yeah.
So the last thing I was thinking about is what now? Mm-hmm. I was more thinking, who cares? I was thinking, I didn't draw a line in the sand and say, I'll never make music again.
Right.
But it didn't feel like something I would do again. It just felt like, you know what? I'm going to be dad for a while and we'll let the chips fall where they may. I mean, go back to school, you know.
Yeah.
I have a degree, and I'm probably a semester away from a computer programming degree. I thought, what the heck? I mean, I really wasn't thinking about next chapters or what do I do now. It was more, what do I not do now?
Yeah.
It was me saying no to just about everything that came across the table. And it felt good. It felt like, you know, I don't have to say yes to you. I've said yes for years.
For years, yeah.
To anything that anybody put in front of me. Because, like, there's a song of mine called What's So, and the whole thing is about putting your head down and working hard and, you know, hoeing the row you're in and doing it as well as you can and then move on to the next one. And I'd always been taught, whatever you put into it, that's what you get out of it. Well, that's not necessarily true with writing songs.
Not at all.
You can work overtime. You can write all day, every single day, the rest of your life, and you may write one good song. You got to know when to shut it down. You got to know when to heal. You got to know when to look for inspiration and when to shut up.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a weird process.
The saying yes thing, it is a different job from other jobs. It's not like you're a contractor and it's like, come build this addition on my house, and you give an estimate, everyone agrees.
Yes.
It's a straightforward thing. You put in the HVAC, you finish everything, and you get paid, and that's it.
And you can look back and say, I did a good job.
I did a good job, where I learned.
It's obvious.
They got what they wanted. They paid me.
The air is coming out cold from
Yes.
the vent. I have done a good job.
I've done a good job.
And our job is not like that.
No, and so you have to say things, especially at the very start, and just say yes. And a lot of times you'll end up in a situation where you're ashamed of the gig or you're ashamed of what came out of it, and you get absolutely nothing back from it. And
kind of like this.
yeah, definitely.
I'm kidding.
Definitely
Come
no checks
on.
being cut here.
Wait, what?
What do you think you took away from it? You kind of explained what you learned from your original mentor. What do you think you learned from your experience with the Civil Wars creatively?
I learned that I was, it was kind of compounded, that thing that I had already learned of just selfishly make music with no one else in mind. Mm-hmm. And it worked again.
Yeah.
And I knew coming out of that, when I did start doing this again, there was never any moment of, well, what are kids doing nowadays?
Yeah.
I didn't care. I don't listen to music. I very seldom listen to music. I listened a lot when I was a kid, but I don't listen to stuff much. And I read a lot. I watch a lot of movies, and I grab things from people's conversations about their own lives. But I definitely learned from that. And I learned also by watching the Alabama Shakes, who are my neighbors, and I share a studio with one of the members of the band, Ben Tanner, and watching the exact same thing happen for them. And they were just a bunch of green kids from Alabama, just like me. They were just making music because it felt good. They weren't chasing anybody else's thing. And it lit up like a wildfire. And then the first thing we put out on our little label was St. Paul and the Broken Bones.
Right.
And the exact same thing. Those kids, they weren't chasing anything. It was just undeniable as soon as the people were just clicking with it. And I still truly believe that that's the way to create best, is to just please yourself and hope things work out, that other people dig what you do.
After the Civil Wars called it quits, John Paul had to go offline musically for about a year and a half. You heard what he said. There was nothing in his head. He wasn't even singing in the shower, so to speak. And then once he had taken that time, his album Beulah could just emerge effortlessly and almost fully formed. I don't know what it is about the creative process that requires an alternating boom-bust cycle. I don't know why songwriters are particularly sensitive to those cycles. In a 2-year period, Dylan released Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde. In back-to-back years, John Hyatt released Bring the Family and Slow Turnin'. In a 5-year period, Lucinda Williams released Car Wheels on a Gravel Road, Essence, and World Without Tears. Here is a Dylan Thomas poem entitled A Process in the Weather of the Heart that captures that phenomenon perfectly. A process in the weather of the heart turns damp to dry. The golden shot storms in the freezing tomb. A weather in the quarter of the veins turns night to day. Blood in their suns lights up the living worm. A process in the eye forewarns the bones of blindness. and the womb drives in a death as life leaks out. A darkness in the weather of the eye is half its light. The fathom sea breaks on the unangled land. The seed that makes a forest of the loin forks half its fruit and half drops down, slow in a sleeping wind. A weather in the flesh and bone is damp and dry. The quick and dead move like two ghosts before the eye. A process in the weather of the world turns ghost to ghost. Each mothered child sits in their double shade. A process blows the moon into the sun, pulls down the shabby curtains of the skin, and the heart gives up its dead. If you have a day to write set aside, do you set aside days to write, or is it more of a, I got an idea, I'm going to go in this afternoon type of deal?
I have 4 kids, and so I have to book a day with myself for sure. Yeah. And after writing doing those 10 years of craft 9-to-5 writing with appointments, I definitely have learned how to call the muse and to shoo the muse away.
Yes.
I'm probably better at that than most. You know, I don't have to wait for inspiration in the middle of the night for me.
You don't have to light votive candles.
No.
Yeah.
No. But I will say, I always laughed about that stuff. I always thought songwriters were over-romanticizing what we do. Like, man, last night I couldn't sleep because I had this song came in. I had to write it down. And I just remember sitting there thinking, bullshit. That's you know, you turn it on, you turn it off. You want a song, you sit down and write a song. You want to stop writing a song, you just stop writing a song.
Right.
But after that period of being completely quiet and not wanting things to come to my head, and then they came, Beulah was written in about a week and a half. I mean, it fell out so fast that it was just like a faucet running and me just trying to catch it all. And all this stuff started making more sense. But I didn't come at it that way. I never waited for songs. I went and got them.
Yeah.
And so now I'm trying to find that balance point.
Well, clearly, some part of you was writing it, you know, to drop out that way. Well, it's either that. I wonder about this a lot. Were you subconsciously writing that record for 2 years, or had you just gotten your facility to a place where you could really open yourself up and just channel something that was really coming in that moment?
I think probably both are true. I think subconsciously I probably was writing that song somewhere in the recesses of my brain. Those things were starting to line up, but until they got to a certain point in the assembly line, I didn't see them. I didn't hear them. And when that did happen and the stars all aligned, it was just train was coming. There was nothing you could do about it, but let it through.
But that's when you're glad that you have the experience. I think there is such a thing of being very inspired, but you're just so untrained. You have zero ability to catch it whatsoever.
Right.
And that's when, you know, like you said, it's not a linear thing you can write for 10 years and get one good song out of it. Maybe 0 good songs out of it.
Right.
But that's when you're glad that you did.
Yeah.
And then inspiration comes.
You know, Diane Warren said, all I really need is 4 good days a year. And I thought, yeah, that's Hall of Fame status. You have 4 good days, and her version of good days are, you know, #1 pop hits, but 4 good days a year, and you're a Hall of Famer, man. You're on Mount Olympus. God. And when you think of it that way, it doesn't make those other, all those other 361 days so oppressive, so heavy, and so like, God, I didn't get one today. Maybe I'll get one tomorrow. Once I heard her say that, I was like, that's so right. So
that's totally it.
If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, if I'm in a co-write and things aren't flowing, let's go see a movie, man.
Yeah.
You know, let's do this again another day. Let's go play with our kids and come back when we're more depressed.
Yeah, man, I don't know when it was, but it was a couple of years ago. My wife really helped me with that. Like I'd come back home for dinner after working all day, and you know, I just live and die by the success. And she was like, "Dude, you cannot bring this home anymore because you're right. Like you're a Hall of Famer if you get 4, so there'll be years where you get none. So you know, I really had to accept the fact of like, man, I went there and sat for 5 or 6 hours today and pursued something, took a lunch break, went back and listened to it. It was pure shit. And so what?
Yeah.
What else am I supposed to do here, man?
Well, and Walt used to beat that into my head. He said, it's about catalog. It's not about one song. It's never been about one song. Don't rest your laurels on any song. Don't pin your hopes to one song. Just keep going, keep writing, keep stacking them up. And when people like one of your songs, they're like, man, I really like that. What else you got? That's all I got. And there's so many people that came to Nashville. I watched it with one good song, and they had a hit, and they bought a house, and they bought a car, and they never had another cut, and they lost it all, and they went back to their small town and said, all shucks. And so stack them high, sell them cheap.
Because people can go back and find those things.
Oh, yes. Oh,
it's not like, I always feel bad for comedians like stand-ups. Like, they do a joke one time on national television, gone. Yeah. You do a Netflix special, you start with nothing afterwards. Whereas, like, there's still people coming to shows of mine that came to hear a song that I wrote 10 years ago, and it's as vital to them as it was to me when I wrote it.
When the Civil Wars had a song on Grey's Anatomy, a lot of people would say to me, like, man, you're so lucky you got on there, man. That made y'all. I'm like, and I wouldn't say this because I knew what they meant by that.
Yeah.
But what I would think is, well, that got people's attention. But once they heard it, they went to listen to more. And if the rest of it sucked, that would have been the end of it. Because lots of people have songs on Grey's Anatomy. Lots of people have songs on the radio. And we all know the one-hit wonders. What else have you got? So it's a common thing in Nashville when somebody writes a hit, everybody goes to their discography because they want that thing. So they're like, Phil Vassar. I remember when Phil Vassar in Nashville, when he started hitting it, everybody was cutting these songs. And I talked to him about it, and he said, man, people are cutting songs that I wrote 10 years ago that were horrible then, and they're still horrible now, but they want a Phil Vassar song. And he said, I'm at a point where I want to tell people, no, you can't cut that song because it's crap.
Yeah.
But, of course, he's a fan of the check, says he.
Well, yeah. Yeah, there's that story of Tom Waits kind of trash talking the Eagles version of Old 55, and someone from the Eagles said, well, yeah, he still cashes the checks for it, though, when they come in the mailbox.
That money still spends.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you think the folks that end up that one-hit wonder thing, do you think it's because beforehand they haven't put in the work, or once they get that one hit, they stop kind of honoring the process? And
I don't really think. I think all things could be true. I think some of those guys just strike it rich on this one song, and that clicks with everybody else. But they're still very talented people. It's just that's the one that clicks, and you can't. No one, if anybody can figure that out, how to gauge other people's interests and then make that thing. Most iconic, innovative ideas, you have one a millennium, you have one a lifetime, and there's the Elon Musks of the world that seem to hit it out of the park left and right, and the Babe Ruths, and the Chris Christophersons, the John Prynes. Mm-hmm. But John Prine never sat and thought, I wonder what my fans would like to hear next.
No, definitely.
I guarantee it.
Is there a song or a number of songs that are North Stars for you? Like, for me, it would be like, I literally conceptualize my job as, in my lifetime, at some point, I'd like to write the equivalent of Amazing Grace. You know what I mean? Like, that's literally how I conceptualize going into work in my studio every day. Mm-hmm. Do you have songs like that you aim towards?
I definitely do. Sam Stone is one of them. Because when I heard it, I was young enough. I had that, it was a live record of John's that I think everyone on earth has. And I remember hearing that a friend of mine mentioned that song, and I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, sit down.
Yeah.
and played me that, and he played me that first. And I remember hearing it and thinking, and I wasn't writing songs at the time. I appreciated songs for sure. I loved songs, especially loved literature. And listen to that song, I just realized either I never write a song or I have to really step up the game, because that's the bar. And it made me feel things I didn't really understand. It was fascinating. And right out of the gate, I realized as a vocal snob, I was like, who's this guy? Man, he can't sing for crap. And he's not really a very good guitar player. And then it wasn't long before I was emulating his guitar playing, which he gets a kick out of, that I emulate. And he said, I never had anybody tell me that I was an inspiration on guitar.
Yeah.
But he is, that whole circular, the back and forth Maybell thing. And but he also taught me that you don't have to be a guitar whiz. You don't, there's so many things that people use as crutches to hide that the song isn't really that great.
Yeah, I was about to say, maybe it's better that you're not.
It's so unadulterated. It is about the song. And if the song isn't great top to bottom, John would have had a career, and he'd be the first person to say so. But, Chris Christopherson's the same way. It's all about the song. And Why Me Lord is probably my amazing grace. That's the one that's just, there's no fluff. There's not a syllable that shouldn't be there. And that's what I try to do. I love economy of lyric. I don't write 5-verse songs.
Yeah.
They're silly.
Yeah.
To me, because I can only compute so much. There's only so much hard drive here for me to take in. I need somebody to really pinpoint a moment and a feeling and a thought.
Yes.
And articulate it as clearly as possible in that 3.5, 4 minutes that my brain will work.
And that is a crucial distinguishing feature between songwriting and poetry. Everyone says, oh, you write poetry. Absolutely do not, because songs come at you, the words are coming at you in real time, and they're not going to stop. If you're reading someone, the reader, by definition, is going at their own speed. Songs are moving at a speed.
Yes.
And so that's why that economy is so much.
I see it as more of a movie than I see anything. I mean, everything I do, I can hear my English professors in the back of my head when I write a song. It's a theme paper. There is an overlying theme. There is a body. There is a climax. There's a denouement. It's all there on most of my songs. Now, will I deconstruct it after the fact to keep you interested? Yeah, but it's an overarching theme that I always go for, and so do all my heroes.
You mentioned earlier when you were talking about Sam Stone that you gravitated towards it because you're such a fan of literature. What is some of the literature that's been a North Star for you?
People like, Flannery O'Connor and things like that, but really Mark Twain, Faulkner, a lot of Southern Gothic writers, but I'm a huge fan of mythology, huge fan of, like a lot of the, I'm drawing a blank now. But most of what I read was the classics, whatever was put in my hand. I grew up in a little town. We didn't have a lot of books. We had the books that we were given. And so when Tom Sawyer comes along, when Catcher in the Rye comes along, A Wrinkle in Time as a younger man, these things that usually looked at the world through a completely different eyeglass and didn't just give me the mundane. That's what I always gravitated to. The more flowery the language, the more use of weird simile and metaphor. Like, do you know a guy named Richard Brautigan?
I do not.
You definitely check him out. The way I came across him is I was in a bookstore and I was looking at the bees because I was looking for a Charles Bukowski book. And the guy standing next to me said, "What you looking for, man?" And I said, "Bukowski." He said, "Oh. You ever read Richard Brautigan?" I said, "No." He said, "Hang on." And he went and found it, and he brought it over to me, and he's standing there just looking at me. We didn't know each other from Adam. He's just standing there looking at me. He's like, "I'm going to buy this for you." Went up front, bought it, handed it to me. He said, "Don't take it too serious," and walked out of the store. And so I highly recommend y'all, as songwriters, as music lovers, to read this, because trout fishing in America is it's my favorite, and it's the one that people know most. But he's a songwriter. He doesn't know it, but he's a songwriter, and all of his simile is so screwed. It's so skewed, but you get it. You know, the first take of it is always like, that makes no, oh. And he's looking at the entire world in a different way. And reading stuff like that helps me with songs to try to be the detective and find that one angle that no one's found, because we're all still writing about love. Yeah. We're all still writing about love and the lack thereof. And so how do you find that angle no one else has ever seen?
That's probably why you mentioned being drawn to mythologies, and different mythologies are great because love is certainly a part of it. But I think you could see that there's a couple more archetypes in there, like, betrayal, shame, so we're writing 5 colors to paint with.
Yeah. Tragedy.
Yeah.
And the heroic pursuit in the face of tragedy.
That life is a tragedy by definition.
Yes, it's how you handle it. I remember talking to Walt about, I don't mind saying this. I was having some issues with depression, and Walt, in his blunt way, he was just like, I was talking to him about going to therapy, and he said, "Man, that's great, especially if you want it. That's wonderful." But he said, the sooner you figure out that you're fucked up, the better off you're going to be. Seriously? And left it at that. And that made me so mad, because I thought, I want a pill, dude. I want some dude to come in here and stroke his beard and say this one brilliant Yoda thing, and I'm fixed, and I am normal, whatever the hell that means.
That's the David Cross thing where he's like, oh, there was a rock in my shoe.
Yeah, this whole time. All I had to do was
take the rock out of my shoe.
And it was a great moment for me, because I view things in a completely different way. I am who I am, and the way that I approach things is based on that. There are certain strengths I have, and there are certain weaknesses I have, and that's definitely what I do with songs. If people think that I'm a good guitar player, I got them fooled. I know what I can do, and I know what I can't, and I never do what I can't in front of you, and I always do what I can, and so I paint myself in the best light possible. And same way with songs. I sing songs that work for my instrument. That's why I don't cover a lot of music, because it really has to work with me, or it's a waste of all of our time.
Looking back on the last 20 years professionally, what are you most grateful for?
Oh, wow, that I can still do it for a living. I mean, I try not to think about that while I'm doing it, that I got to pay bills, but that I've been able to do it on my own terms for this long, just completely selfishly making myself happy for a living. I'm that 1%, and I know that. I don't ever forget it. Yeah. And so I really try my best to give back and help give a leg up for musicians that just haven't had that break.
Is that kind of the impetus for Single Lock?
100%. The whole 100%. Idea was we had a financial guy in town, Will Trapp, a really close friend of mine. He said he wanted to immerse himself in it, and he wanted to help. And he said, what's the thing that is the major impediment for artists? And Ben and I both said, capital, having the money to be able to make a proper record with a proper producer and a proper studio, and not have a clock ticking, and they don't have 4 jobs, and they're trying to and they can't get in a van and go tour, so they just stick it out on, what it was a fledgling, internet situation at the time. We figured out that was the main thing that needed to happen. So that's what I love most, is creating. So let's do that. Let's put our money where our mouth is and find artists in our backyard that just need a record, and stick them in a van and shove them down the road. And I still believe that's because we're becoming traveling minstrels again. Recorded media it's it's a thing of the past. I mean, we're holding on to that is silly. So what matters most is that we sign artists that can play and can captivate and can make you want to come back to another show, because that's lifeblood for us now is touring. And if you don't want to tour, get out of this game.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, well, that is what's valuable now. Someone comes to a show that will, by definition, be unique. Do you find yourself struggling at all? I don't know how much you do this, but I want to do as similar a show as I can because I want the show to be good, like you were talking about. Like, you want to play to your strengths, but then at the same time, if you don't allow some element of chaos into it, people can kind of feel that you're not walking that balance, and it feels like they're just getting the same old show from you. How do you walk that?
I struggle with that. A lot of that is in, and I, learning from John Prine is in stories, is in banter between songs, and I'm in the Jerry Seinfeld camp of play the hits.
Oh yeah.
Give them what they want and make it as fine-tuned and as good a product as you possibly can. Blow them away. Don't let them have air. Mm-hmm. If you go up there and you just wing it, and some people dig that. Some people like the off-the-cuff thing and the excitement of that. And that's his argument against like the Louis C.K.'s who just blow their set up and do a whole new thing the next time around.
Yeah.
And Jerry's like, that's silly. You're doing a disservice by doing that. And that's about you. That's not about your audience. I think somewhere in the middle of that is and I'm still figuring that out.
Because you hear the same thing about Dave Chappelle. And so you're right. Like, my sister saw him recently, and it was one of these shows where he kind of blew it up and tried. And so the show kind of ended on a down note. So on the one hand, you've done a disservice to that specific audience, but then his latest 2 specials on Netflix are the shit. Like, they're so good. So it's tough because that specific audience was kind of screwed, and then the larger audience that's going to watch it on Netflix has been served immensely,
It comes down to what, it's that selfish thing again. What do you want to give them? What do you want their experience to be? And that's what he thrives on, that sitting right there on the edge and finding something he would never find if he did something formulaic. If he did something that was set in stone, he would never get that. That's who he is. And so he's serving that. And that's exactly what he should do. And that's the other thing about Jerry that kind of frustrates me is like, you can't tell someone else what they should do.
Right.
I mean, it makes no sense to have a gripe about, it makes no sense for me to gripe about modern day country music and gripe about what's on the radio. I don't understand that, because these people are giving people what they want, and millions of people are buying it, and they are loving it, and they're buying tickets, and they're buying T-shirts, and they're advertising it everywhere they go. Mm-hmm. And who the hell am I to tell them you're an idiot for liking that music?
Right.
I just don't see how that is a healthy thing for anyone involved. If you don't like that music, don't listen to it. And if you think that it's doing a disservice to country, then go make a country record. Go make that record you can't hear, that you're looking for, but no one's making it. Well, then go make it and encourage people around you, if you want to do that. But I don't see any point in doing that, because, and the reason I came to that idea is because I used to get frustrated too. And I used to think that people in Nashville were making this music and just, as bottom feeders and going for the lowest common denominator in music and just selling it fluff. And people were like lemmings just taking it. And there's lots of schools of thought on that. Mm-hmm. But I've met a lot of these guys. And in those 10 years that I was up there, I was around, like Luke Bryan and Chris Stapleton and Isbell back home. And all of us were cutting our teeth at about the same time. And they all believe that what they're doing is great. None of them are like embarrassed to look in the mirror. They love what they do. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to get in the way of that. I'm not going to discount that. You love what you do what you love. And a lot of people love what you do. Wonderful. Godspeed.
Well, I'm glad you decided to take some time back on the road and come on this cruise ship, man. John Paul White, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, man.
that's our show for this month. Thanks for listening. John Paul White's latest album is Beulah, available everywhere digital music is sold or streamed. Today's episode was engineered and mixed by Matt Schuessler. Research and editorial direction provided by the intrepid and thorough Paul Barbagallo. Additional on-site wrangling by Don Bartlett. And thank you to Brendan Anthony from the Texas Music Office. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.